Hi, my name is David, and today I want to go over my custom Magic the Gathering League of Legends draft cube. So, there's a lot of words there, but this basically was a big project that I undertook a few years ago, making a entirely draftable Magic the Gathering cube based off of the IP of League of Legends. And I've spent the past few years playtesting this cube with my friends, and I think it's a great, fun little project that I want to share with other people. So today we are starting off the first of our deep dives into the 11 archetypes in the cube, starting off with our blue-white archetype of Shurima. So a few things before we get too into it. One, I made this cube around COVID, so like 2020, 2021 is kind of the design that we're emulating here. And so a lot of the cards are of the power level of the standard format around that time. I am a big fan of the kind of mid power level, especially compared to the modern standard metagame that timeline kind of offered. Think like Theros Beyond Death, Ikoria type stuff. That's kind of what I was shooting for when I was making the cube, as well as the cube is based off of the lore of League of Legends. It's not based off of the video game; it's based off the stories behind the video game. So, kicking it off here with Shurima, the Shuriman Empire used to be a big giant like conquer the world type empire. I think like Romans analog kind of, but they were Egyptian themed. So they lived in the desert and they all had animal heads basically. Part of the thing that let the Shuriman Empire dominate the globe was that they had a giant sun disk that could bless their people with godlike abilities and turn them into functionally gods. But they took over, they ruled over the area, the entire deserts, and then into some other parts of the world. Then some demon dudes rolled up and killed all their gods. And then the empire fell. So now in modern day Shurima, the modern Shuriman like kind of groups are nomadic tribes that kind of move between like bizarre merchant cities, Bazaar merchant cities, that they dive into the ancient cities and ancient tombs and stuff and try to kind of artifact rob all the ancient society and sell it back for some coins so that they can live another day. So it's this kind of ancient, historical, powerful empire mixed with this modern day kind of grab as you can, live by the seat of your pants, Aladdin style vibes. So those are the vibes that we're trying to capture in our blue-white archetype here. It being blue-white does make it a control deck, as you can see with our first card on the screen here, Absolute Silence. So let's just get into it. So Absolute Silence here is our 4-mana instant. It says counter all other spells and abilities. So just a pretty straightforward counter spell. Counters the thing that's currently on the everything that's currently on the stack except for itself, right? This is an expensive counterspell if you're just countering one thing, but it's also good to keep some of the more combo-y decks in check in the format and in the cube. So this is quite a good pickup for the control deck to keep on top of things. Next up, we've got Ancient Burial Ground here, a 3-mana sorcery. It says, look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of them into your graveyard, and the rest on back on the top of your library in any order. Those astute among you will notice that this is just Surveil 5. When I was designing the cube, Surveil was not yet an evergreen keyword, and even now that it has become an evergreen keyword, I don't want to have this say Surveil 5, even though it would save a lot of room on the text of the card, because I don't want to signal to new drafters that Surveil is a draftable archetype. This is just a card that can load up your graveyard because the Shuriman Empire cares about their graveyard, cares about their past and their history, while also letting you kind of sculpt the top of your deck as you see fit. And speaking of graveyard, as you can see here, we have our keyword for the Shurima archetype in Memoir. So this is 1 blue. On this cost, Memoir can have any cost. And Memoir says, exile this card from your graveyard to return target card that shares a card type with it from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a sorcery. You can pay 3 mana, exile this card from your graveyard, and then take a different sorcery from your graveyard and add it to your hand. So this lets the Shurima deck, as it's in its control archetype, kind of keep up on card advantage. They kind of always have cards in hand. Between blue card draw, white removal, and this Memoir effect, they always have options in hand. The biggest thing that the Shurima deck has to balance is how much mana they're willing to spend on their plays each turn. If you need to support the board so that you're not dying to your opponent's aggressive strategies, or if you can afford to kind of keep your resource engine going. That's kind of the tension of the Shurima archetype. Next we've got Arcane Thief, which is a 4-mana 2/1, which shows you that not many of the Shurima guys are very strong. It's 4 mana for a 2/1, not even a 2/2. But he does have a quite powerful ability. At blue and tap to draw a card, and whenever you activate a Memoir ability, untap Arcane Thief. So this guy can really get you on that card advantage, because when you're activating Memoir, you're adding cards back to your hand. He lets you draw a bunch of cards. Even just if you're able to somehow achieve a board stall, he just draws you a ton of cards. Arcane Thief is very good at breaking that card advantage parity. Next, we've got Ascension Priest, which is our 5-mana 2/3 with Flash. He says, whenever Ascension Priest enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains protection from everything until end of turn. Then we've got the reminder text for what protection from everything says, just because some people don't remember the entire acronym of DET or what it stands for. And then we've got Memoir 3 here, again on 1 white and a white, and this can return other creatures from your graveyard to your hand, which is quite a powerful effect because most games of draft are won and lost on their creatures. Next, we've got Ascension Ritual, mimicking our Ascension Priest effect. This is a 7-mana aura. This says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gains protection from everything. This effect does not remove auras. So this is very similar to a card named Spectra Ward, which gives protection from all colors and does not remove auras. But this is 7 mana because in a draft environment, the format's a little slower than something like Spectra Ward. I think Spectra Ward was a core set card, so it was meant to be played in command or in standard. And 5 mana is a little easier to get to in standard while still being able to pressure. Whereas in draft, the format tends to run a little bit slower. So 7 mana is still very achievable, especially for a control deck. Especially for a control deck that does not have many powerful creatures. This can really kind of swing the tide, allow you to have perma blocker, and if it's got vigilance, or if you can give it vigilance, or some way to untap, like our Arcane Thief from earlier, you can really put the hurt in while attacking and blocking pretty consistently with anything that has the Ascension Ritual. Next up, we've got Azir, which we saw in the last video, going over the archetypes. He is the leader of the Shuriman Empire. He is the Sunborn King, so he's a very powerful card. To 4-mana 3/3, when he enters the battlefield, you make 2 1/1 White Soldier creature tokens, so he ends up being 5 total power split across 3 bodies, so you can't just throw 1 removal spell at him to get rid of it. He also says whenever you activate Memoir on a creature card, you may return Azir from your graveyard to the battlefield. So when you activate Memoir from a card in the graveyard targeting a second card, Azir, the third card, just hits the board. And then he gets his ETB, and you get your 1/1 White Soldier tokens, and then your other Memoir card goes back to your hand, which you can then resolve. He doesn't take any mana when you do that, which makes him a great kind of early to mid-game blocker, where he comes down, can block 2 creatures alongside with his soldiers. And then in the mid to late game, as you're really churning your resource advantage, if you've got all that mana to really start putting the pressure on, he can just come back forever and just kind of make a very, very wide board. A very, very powerful effect. Next up, we've got the Brackern Crystal, a 4-mana legendary artifact. It says Memoir costs you control cost 1 less to activate, and it taps to add 1 mana. So this just helps with some of the mana problems that this deck can have, though this is spending your turn 4 at the earliest to do nothing else on your turn, not advance your board state. Every Memoir card has at least a color in the cost, so this will never reduce it to free. And it doesn't make color, so it cannot help pay for the colored part of the Memoir costs. So this is a very, very powerful card if the control deck can find the time to stick it. Next, we've got Corrupted Shuriman. This is a 4-mana 3/2 with flying. It says other creatures you control with flying have hexproof. This is kind of a draft smoother, I call them. This card is not only viable in the blue-white deck that has a good number of flyers in it, but also the blue-black deck that has a good number of flyers in it, and kind of encourages you to splash a third color if you see some of these draft smoothers, this being one of them. Next, we've got Crypt Robber, a 2-mana 1/2 with flash. Seeing these cards have a lot of flash on them, at least the creatures have a good amount of flash on them. It says, when Crypt Robber enters the battlefield, reveal the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest in your graveyard. So you can sculpt it replaces itself, so it's 2 mana, draw 1, basically, 2 mana free body at flash, so you can do it at instant speed, which is quite good, because your Memoir abilities can be activated at instant speed, which means that sometimes you need to commit to the board, commit a blocker, and then it can draw you the card back. And sometimes, if your opponent doesn't present too much of a threat, you can activate your Memoir card from your graveyard, exiling it to get that card advantage. So having these cheap replaceable flash plays are quite useful for the deck. And this one even not only replaces itself, but also loads up your graveyard to either recur the other pieces you're milling, or set up Memoir cards in the graveyard to recur the other pieces you already have in there. Next, we've got Cull the Meek. This deck was struggling with keeping some of its creatures on board, so we made Cull the Meek as a 2-mana counter-target spell that targets a creature you control. These creatures don't really live combat, and being able to hit them with removal spells and then swing in meant that the aggressive decks had a little bit too easy of a time running over our control deck here. And then this also has Memoir 2. Counterspells are very, cheap counterspells especially, are pretty dangerous in this deck because of the ability to activate Memoir on an instant and then return the counterspell to hand and then cast the counterspell. It means you kind of have like permanent counterspell in grave. So the cheap counterspells, the 2-mana one here, has a very limited, narrow scope of what it can target. Whereas the more expensive ones, like Absolute Silence that we saw earlier, are 4 mana. So you're going to need 2 to 3 mana to use the Memoir cost plus Absolute Silence. You're looking at 6, maybe 7, 8 mana in order to do that loop. And it's your opponent. Theoretically, your opponent knows about it, but often things get lost in the graveyard. So counterspells are very powerful in this deck because you can loop things back at instant speed. Next, we got Discovering Lineage, just a good classic white removal spell. It's a 2-mana sorcery. It says destroy target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. This is Path to Exile, except that it destroys, and it's a sorcery, and it's 2 mana. So for draft reasons, this card feels about the right power level. It can definitely bail you out of some tough spots. The life gain you don't super care about because you are a control deck, and so the plan is to go over the top of your opponent's board anyways eventually. So this is quite a useful pickup for the control strategy. Next up, we've got Eternal Shurima. This is one of the more powerful cards of the archetype. This is a 2-mana 2/2 that says whenever you activate a Memoir ability, you may return this card from exile back to your graveyard. And on his text, we can see Memoir to remind us that the exiling the card from your graveyard is part of the effect resolution, not part of the cost to activate the ability. So when you activate his own Memoir effect, he does not return himself to the graveyard, because when you activate Memoir, he's still in your graveyard. So his ability goes on the trigger. His trigger goes on the stack, but it doesn't resolve for anything because he's still in the graveyard. But when you activate a different card's Memoir ability, he will go back into the graveyard. Then you can use his ability, add a creature back. He goes away. All the good fun that you get to have with a very consistent, very reliable resource looping engine, assuming your opponent doesn't touch your graveyard in any aggressive way. Next, we've got Forgotten Soul, just another good removal spell that also can double as a counterspell. 5 mana, exile target creature or spell as an instant. As a reminder, if you exile a spell off the stack, it does not resolve because it's not there when it goes to resolve. So this kind of acts as a counterspell. It also acts as a catch-all removal, though quite an expensive one for the deck. Next, we've got Kohari War Mages. This is our draft archetypal uncommon. If you see this card or the Eternal Shurima from before, you have some pretty good signs that you might be in Shurima. This is a 4-mana 2/2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may return target creature card from exile to its owner's graveyard. So not only does this let you loop your own Memoir guys and cards back into your graveyard when you are casting non-creatures, and you can use those Memoir effects to grab non-creatures that you can then use to loop the Memoir card back to your graveyard, to loop the non-creature back to your hand. It's a very, very powerful resource loop, though it is quite mana intensive. You can also use this effect on the number of Oblivion Ring style effects that are in the game. When we get to our Void archetype, their whole keyword does a Oblivion Ring style thing. There's also some Oblivion Ring style effects scattered throughout the cube, where you can exile your opponent's card until the card leaves the card that you play leaves the battlefield. But then with Kohari War Mages here, you can kick it straight into their graveyard, so that even when your card leaves, they do not get their card back because it's now in the graveyard. And speaking of one of those Oblivion Ring style effects, we've got Lost in the Scrolls. This is our 4-mana Oblivion Ring. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a creature an opponent controls until Lost in the Scrolls leaves the battlefield, and it's got Memoir 3, so we can loop some of our enchantments, like our big auras that we saw before, back onto our hand if they get beaten. Now we've got Lost to Time, a 4-mana instant says each opponent exiles a creature with the highest toughness among creatures they control. So this is a very powerful removal spell, although it is 4 mana, and you do not get to control what it hits. If you are losing to aggro decks, this card is great. If you are losing to value engine, this card is not great. So this card tends to get played and see more play against the aggressive decks, so it does only come down on turn 4. Whereas the more mid-range decks that are able to kind of pressure life total while setting up an engine, those engine pieces tend to be 1/1s, 2/2s, maybe 3/3s, not the biggest dudes on the board. So Lost to Time does not often hit those value pieces, putting it in a pretty good spot where it is needed removal, but it's not too powerful. Next, we've got Nasus Scroll Guardian to the King, a 5-mana 5/5, notably the biggest body that we have in our Shuriman archetype here, especially for its mana cost, being straight on curve. He says, at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 2, so you get to kind of sculpt your draws a little bit, though the cards do not go to the graveyard. He's not that good. He also says, spells and abilities your opponent's control cannot cause cards to leave your graveyard. So one of the big ways to counterplay this deck is get rid of the Memoir cards before they activate their effects, or get rid of Azir before he starts looping back all over the place. And Nasus, as the Scroll Guardian to the King, protects the King's secrets and keeps him nice and safe in the graveyard where he is most powerful, as well as preventing your opponent from messing with your stuff too much. Next up, we got Raised by the Sun Disc, a 5-mana enchantment aura that says enchant permanent. You control enchanted permanent. Enchanted creature is legendary and is a champion in addition to its other types. So this is kind of to represent the Shuriman Empire conquering the world and being able to take whatever they want. You can take artifacts, you can take enchantments, you can take lands if you really want to. But if you take creatures, they become legendary and are raised to be champions within the Shuriman Empire. And there's some various legendary and champions matters synergies throughout the non-archetypal cards in the cube that can matter for that. But this is a very powerful control piece, being able to take your opponent's best piece and take it for yourself. Next, we've got Reawakening the Lineage. This is one of the more powerful cards for the Shuriman archetype at a 5-mana legendary instant. And as we all know, legendary instants and sorceries can only be cast while you have a legendary creature or a legendary planeswalker on the field. This cube has no planeswalkers. I found them not to be terribly fun in draft. So we cut all the planeswalkers from the cube, but there's tons of legendary creatures all over the cube. So casting it is not too difficult, though it is still a hoop you have to jump through. This card is very powerful. It says choose one, put all cards you own in exile into your graveyard. You may activate memoir abilities without paying their mana costs until the end of the turn. Or return up to 2 non-land permanents to their owner's hand, create 2/1/1 white soldier creature tokens. So being an instant, that bottom effect is very, very powerful if you are losing on board state. Your opponent goes to combat, they maybe commit some mana in the main phase 1, they swing at you, you bounce their 2 biggest dudes, make 2 little blockers, block their other guys, maybe trade down if you're lucky, and then your opponent has to recast those cards on the following turn where they probably can't attack, and then swing at you the following turn. So it really, really helps you with that tempo game plan, getting yourself into the late game if you're falling behind on board. And if you're ahead on board, this top effect is incredibly powerful for card advantage. Being able to load all of your memoir cards back into your graveyard and then use their effects for free, which means if you have any instants in your graveyard with memoir, you can then just immediately loop Reawakening the Lineage back to your hand, trigger all the effects because they're all instant speed, load your hand all the way up, deploy the hand, and then in a couple turns, if you run out of hand, cast Reawakening the Lineage again. This is definitely one of the cards that really pushes this archetype over the edge once it has established board presence. Next up, we've got Remnants of Ascension, a 3-mana instant. A little combat trick here. It says target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Scry 2. This is a bit overcosted for this effect, but it does have Memoir, which means it can loop back our other powerful instants, like our Reawakening the Lineage, and does give us good blockers on the turn that we cast it, as well as setting up our draw. Next, we've got Scholar of the Sands, and this starts off a cycle across all of the archetypes as a 3-mana 2/2 that's in both colors of the archetype and has the archetypal keyword on it. So for Scholar of the Sands here, she's a 3-mana 2/2 with Memoir 3, being able to loop back your other creatures, and triggering Azir and triggering your Eternal Shurima, all that good stuff. Just a good pack filler card that is still quite strong for the Shurima draft archetype. Next up, we've got our Land of Shurima. So each of the draft archetypes has a land that is their color pair and is a straight-up dual reprint. It's obviously not named what the magic duels are, but it has the Plains Island type, enters untapped and taps for either color. There are no fetches in this cube. Anything that finds lands finds basic lands, so the land types here don't really matter. They're mostly in there just for magic nerds to point and do the Leo pointing meme at them. Go, oh, it's a duel. But because of the 2-color prevalence in this cube, splashing became quite difficult if some of the mana fixing lands did not enter untapped. So we put the cycle of duels in here just to kind of help smooth over if you wanted to splash a 3rd color as a minor accessory to your draft archetype. Next, we've got Sivir, Herald of the King here as a 3-mana 3/2 with First Strike, which, if we're paying attention, is quite an efficient rate for this archetype. It says, whenever you activate a Memoir ability, you may return any card from your graveyard to your hand instead. So this is a very powerful flexibility tool, allowing you to use any Memoir card to return any card from your graveyard to your hand, and not just to the archetype, the card type that they are. This works incredibly well with our Reawakening the Lineage, because now any Memoir card can bring back your Reawakening the Lineage and bring back any card into your hand. This is a very powerful card for that card advantage engine, and really holds the board down in the early game as a 3/2 first striking blocker, and then can turn the corner in that mid game as you're trying to pressure life total, kind of being a little difficult to block herself. Next up, we got Spirit Guardian. This is one of my favorite cards in the cube. I am a big fan of when Wizards of the Coast used to do 4-mana instants that said draw 2 and then had the set keyword on them. So I made a 4-mana instant that says draw 2 and then has the set keyword on it. This has the archetypal keyword on it. It says Memoir 2. It's a pretty cheap Memoir effect, especially on an instant, because I kind of wanted this card to be a little bit pushed because I'm a big fan of this kind of design and I wanted people to play it. Next up, we got Strike the Darkened Down, a 3-mana sorcery that says exile target creature and all other creatures it controller controls with the same name as that creature. Draw a card if more than one creature was exiled this way. So this is a very good kind of catch-all removal piece for some of the more powerful and more recursive pieces in the cube. You can just exile them straight away. But also, there are some very token-heavy factions in this cube. And so being able to wipe away all the tokens and draw a card to replace itself for only 3 mana is quite powerful on either mode of this card. I like this design a lot. Next up, we've got Talia the Wandering Weaver, a 4-mana 3/2 that says when she enters the battlefield, creatures opponents control get -1/-0 until your next turn, kind of making it harder for your opponents to swing at you. She also says when she dies, we put her from her owner's library second from the top. It's an optional trigger, so you don't have to screw over your draw if you feel like you're in control of the game. But if you want to keep her in rotation, keep gumming up your opponent's attacks, and having a free blocker every other turn, you're more than welcome to keep throwing her on the top of the deck. Next up, we've got Tomb Statue, a 2-mana artifact. It says when Tomb Statue enters the battlefield, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest in your graveyard. 3 mana, sacrifice Tomb Statue, draw 2 cards. Some of the other blue archetypes in this cube play around with artifacts, and Shurima didn't have that many artifacts, so we threw another one in there, just to allow that splashability to kind of cross over with our blue-red archetype. It's just good card draw. It replaces itself immediately. One goes back in your hand, the other into your graveyard, and you can blow it up on turn 3, the turn after you played, if you played on curve, to draw a bunch of cards, though it does not help your board. You will draw a ton of cards with this effect. Rounding out the back end of our Shurima archetype here, we've got Valiva, a 2-mana 2/1 with flying, that says whenever you activate a memoir ability, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So this is a very powerful effect at keeping your board nice and wide to be able to make a bunch of blockers to get you into that late game where you can then turn this overwhelming board into attackers. She's also a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, which is quite good on rate, especially with a memoir effect of 2 mana. She is very powerful at pushing attacks in the early game and forcing your opponent to respond to you instead of developing their own game plan, as she is not only a good attacker, but she also makes great blockers and becomes a threat in the late game. I believe is a very powerful card, one of our kind of build-arounds at the uncommon slot for Shurima. And finishing out our Shuriman archetype is Xerath the Chained Ascended at 6 mana for a 2/2. Again, remember those tiny stats for this archetype. He says, whenever a creature dealt damage by Xerath this turn would die, exile it instead. Now, this probably isn't going to happen in combat. I mean, you could multi-block with him, I guess, but it's a 6-drop. You don't really want to be doing that. But the rest of his text says, 3 mana, discard a card, counter target non-creature spell. Xerath deals X damage to target creature, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. So Xerath is a very, very powerful mage contained from his ascended form into this kind of sarcophagus-like thing. But he still is kind of the master of magic for the Shuriman archetype, which means if you want to start throwing spells at Xerath, he says no and throws them right back at your face and then starts exiling your board because he's a very powerful spellcaster. This card does not really turn the tempo after you resolve it if you are dying to aggro, but in the mid-range matchups that are relying on some more synergy pieces, one of their non-creatures, their enchantments, their artifacts, their instants, their sorceries, Xerath can really start to turn the tide and kind of stop your opponent, or make them think twice anyways, about if they can afford to cast some non-creatures, and force you to spend your mana as you have left it open and discard cards. Xerath is a very powerful win condition for the deck if your opponent's game plan cares about what Xerath cares about, basically. And that wraps up our Shuriman archetype. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this kind of little overview of the 29 or so cards here that we've got for the Shuriman archetype. Next week, we'll be going down the list. We're going to our white-black archetype in Targon's Peak, the Mount Targon archetype of the Solari and the Lunari. That is a very fun archetype. I'm a big fan of that one. It's kind of our very classic control archetype for the cube, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a dirty, degenerate control player myself. So I'm very excited to go over those with you guys next week. If you have any thoughts about the cube or any of these cards, please let me know in the comments. I read all the comments because I want to know what you guys are thinking about when it comes to these cards. Let me know what you guys think, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.